Today is Wednesday, August 5th. It's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to call the Twinsburg Board of Education regular meeting to order. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Curtis?
Here.
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Felber?
Here.
And Mrs. DeFabio and Mrs. Gordon are absent.
Very well. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I believe there are any addendums to the agenda. So we'll move on to my President's report. Good evening and welcome, parents, community, and administration of Twinsburg City Schools. I'm Mark Curtis, and I'm honored to be your board president. I would like to begin by thanking all of our parents for your considerations in choosing options for your children attending classes beginning in the fall. I recognize that given the circumstances, your decisions did not come easily. However, I hope that the efforts of the district to provide as much information as possible made your decisions more informed. I would also like to thank our staff in their preparations for educating our students in the fall. While much has been done in the planning of the fall, the work continues, and this cannot happen without their commitment to doing all that they can to provide the very best education possible. These efforts include our teachers, maintenance staff, secretaries, bus drivers, administrators, and all others who are still working to prepare for the opening. Although we've communicated numerous times how extraordinarily difficult it is to adapt to these circumstances, you continue to rise to the occasion with optimism, knowing it can all change at a moment's notice. The Twinsburg community must know that we remain steadfast in doing all that is necessary to ensure the safety and well-being of the students and staff. We continue to follow the guidance of our health professionals as well as state guidelines in driving our decisions. We also appreciate your continued feedback. Please continue to stay engaged as we navigate these uncharted waters and hope that we may see an end to our current reality soon. This concludes my President's report. I will now turn the meeting over to our Superintendent, Mrs. Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Good evening, Board of Education. Good evening, members of our community who are watching us live stream or on our cable channel. It is so good to be back at the Government Center, and we thank the hospitality of Mayor Yates and his staff here for always providing such a wonderful place for our board meetings to occur. Board of Education, it has been a very busy summer. I think since March 16th it's been busy in an extraordinary way, and it continues to be that way, and we are so proud of the staff members that support our students and our community. They are working hard to make sure that all things are in place, ready to roll, whether the option a parent has selected would be our on-campus option or the virtual option. We have had wonderful meetings with members of our staff. This week the administrative team is in consecutive days of meetings, and we are very excited about the coming school year. I'm going to ask Mrs. Farthing if she could please post for us this evening the proposed start and end days for our schools. We worked through these details with our administrative team, and I know this is information that our parents are looking for so that if child care needs are necessary, that they have some information as far as what that would look like. So let's start with our preschool children. For our AM preschool at Wilcox Primary School, the youngest of our Tigers will begin their day at 9:05 a.m. and the AM preschool will conclude at 11:35 a.m. Our afternoon preschool for the smallest of our Tigers will begin their day at 1:05 p.m. and their school end time will be 3:35 p.m. With regard to kindergarten and grade 1, as you know, Board of Education, our kindergarten children will remain at Wilcox Primary School, and our first grade children will attend classes at Samuel Bissell Elementary School in the coming year. Their start time, though, will be the same, and that will be a 9 o'clock start time and a 3:50 p.m. end of their school day. For our children in grades 2 and 3, under the leadership of Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Winter, they will actually be learning on campus across the street here at the high school in the coming year so that we can ensure 6 feet social distancing for all. and their start of their day will be 8 o'clock a.m., and their school end time is 2:50 p.m. For our students in grades 4 through 6, those who would have attended Dodge Intermediate School, this year they're joining our Bissell students and staff also at the high school, again to ensure that 6-foot social distancing and using the largest classrooms in our district. Their start of their day is 7 a.m. and they will end their day at 1:55 p.m. Our students in 7th and 8th grade are going to be having their classes this year at Dodge Intermediate School, and their start time mirrors that of the 4 through 6 band, and their start of their day will be 7 o'clock a.m., and they will also conclude at 1:55 p.m. And then, of course, our high school students in grades 9 through 12 board, as you know, our 9th graders will join 7th and 8th at Dodge, and our 10th through 12th graders will be attending class at R.B. Chamberlain. Regardless, students in grades 9 through 12 will begin their day at 8:15 a.m. and end their day at 3:05 p.m. So we will post these times on the district website tomorrow. We are now working through our bus routes. Now that we have parents who have selected our on-campus versus the virtual academy, we can finalize bus routes and soon get that information out to parents. They need that information as well. Also, board, this week we posted our school supply lists. I think, yes, I sent it out through a Blackboard Connect message yesterday. They are also posted on the district website. And it's really important because this coming weekend is Ohio's tax-free weekend. And so I know parents would have an interest in potentially going out and doing some back-to-school shopping or shopping online. And so those school supplies are now listed on the district website. A reminder that this evening on the Board of Education's agenda, there's a resolution for the board to authorize the purchase of the clear backpacks. Those are backpacks for students in preschool through grade 12 who will have selected the on-campus option. And when the students attend soft reopening week, they will receive their Chromebook, if they don't already have one, in their backpack, and they will have additional information for parents will come soon with regard to our soft reopening week. Again, that week is planned for Monday, August 31st through Thursday, September 3rd. And the way it looks like at this point is we'll be inviting 1/4 of our students to our campuses on the 4 days of that week. So teachers will have an opportunity to get to know their class, to talk through some new safety protocols, talk through the curriculum, talk through using Chromebooks if the students haven't already had that opportunity, and then potentially also doing some assessments because we're a little concerned about regression of skills from last year. So we want a good understanding as to where our students are coming to school this year so that the teachers can then begin to plan some exciting lessons that meet the needs of our students. Also, Board of Education, a reminder that new student registration is going on right now, and the last opportunity for parents to register their student during our new student registration process is Tuesday, August 11th. Our district website has a lot of information with regard to registering children for school, so we ask you to please visit www.twinsburg.k12.oh.us and find the information with regard to registration. It's underneath the parent tab on the website. So we look forward to meeting all of our new students, all of our new Tigers and their families, and if you've not already registered an appointment for registration, we would ask that you do that because it helps in our planning if we know ahead of time which of our Tigers happen to be new, either to our on-campus option or to our virtual option. Board of Education, the annual report and district calendar is at the printer. Thank goodness. It took a lot of revisions this year because of all of the changes of how we're operating. So we worked really hard on that this last month, and it is at the printer, and that will be in mailboxes within the next week to 10 days. You will notice on the district calendar this year that we have eliminated a lot of the activities because of the unknown nature of how we're going to operate as a school district with regard to having concerts and programs. We have removed those from the calendar, and parents can always look on the district website where the district calendar is posted for the most up-to-date information. We just didn't want to include a date that's ultimately canceled. It causes too much confusion. So we took that route, and of course our parents can find the most updated information on the district website. And then the last thing, Board of Education, this evening, we have a guest who will be up shortly to provide an administrative report. Mr. Paul Fallon is with us tonight. Back in the fall of 2019, the board commissioned a community phone survey with Mr. Fallon's company. It's called Fallon Research and Communications, as we were interested in understanding or gaining feedback from our residents with regard to our conceptual legacy project. That feels like 4 years ago after all that has happened since then. But this evening, Mr. Fallon is here to present to the board and our community the research feedback from the phone study, and I think you're going to find the results pretty interesting. So we'll be with Mr. Fallon very shortly, and that concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Powers. Moving on to item 3 under E is committee reports. I know that the policy committee recently met. I'm not aware of any other reports. Rob, do you have anything for CDCC?
No.
Okay. So we'll move on to committee reports. As both members who are on the committee are not present this evening, I will defer to Mrs. Powers, who was also present during that meeting, and also Mr. Aho.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. The board's policy committee met, I believe, on Tuesday night of this week, and they actually reviewed 16 policies. One policy, the graduation requirements policy, was actually removed from the agenda. It requires further study with regards to the credits for a student in their senior year of high school. And so there will be another policy subcommittee to take a look at that policy draft once more once we are able to gather some information from our high school counselors and administration. This evening on the agenda you will find 2 policies that the policy committee asked be forward to tonight's meeting. The remaining policies will be up for a first reading on the August 19th board agenda. The reason that decision was made, it is a lot to read. It wouldn't have been fair to the board to give those to you Tuesday night and expect you to do your research and ask questions about them for a first reading this evening. So those will become a part of the agenda for August 19th. But the 2 policies that you will find on the agenda for this evening are very important for our school community because they're related to the reopening of the school district. The first policy, 5200, and that's the policy with regard to attendance. And board, you will say, we see this policy a lot because in fact this is a very important policy. It talks about how attendance is calculated for students, but this year the importance of the revision has to do with calculating attendance should students be learning this year in the remote platform. And so what you'll notice on the policy, and it's quite deep into it, and I think it's lined with yellow actually near the end, talks about when we're deciding attendance for students, how do you decide if a student has been actually in school, if they're going to be learning remotely from home. And this is a significant policy because in addition to this policy, the district must submit to the Ohio Department of Education our remote learning plan for the coming school year, and part of the plan would address how would the school district calculate attendance for students who are learning remotely. So in a nutshell, what we are going to do, and as recommended by the department and also by Neola, is teachers will work together in what we call PLCs, professional learning communities. It doesn't matter if a teacher is teaching remotely or if a teacher is teaching on campus. It will be our desire this year, board, that students in either place are going to pretty much stay even keel with regard to the instruction that they are going to be learning. So students who are out in the remote world, the lessons will be much more regimented than they may have been in the fall, spring quarter last year. And the teachers in both platforms are going to stay pretty lockstep with what they're teaching and when they're teaching those content area skills. In deciding how to determine attendance, what this policy will suggest is that teachers in their grade level PLCs, professional learning communities, or their subject area departments, for example, say the math department at the high school, will determine the amount of time it will take for a student to proficiently complete a project, and they will create a rubric. And so say Mr. Princhick in the math department would suggest that for a student to complete a project, it may take 4 hours. Because we know that students can't be always on screen time. They need direct instruction, they will have Google Meets, and those minutes are easy to calculate when a teacher is actually working on the screen with a child. But it's when we're gonna ask students to do independent work, problem-based learning, that's a little trickier. And so the teachers will determine this project will take, say, 4 hours. So if the student completes the project and they meet all the requirements on the rubric, they have met it to a proficient standard, they will get that 4 hours of credit for being in attendance that day. So this policy would suggest that that is how the Board of Education would ask the teachers to calculate attendance in the remote world, so that they're actually considering the amount of time projects will be taken, and then of course we would ask that when students are presenting them assessed on those projects, it would be student engaged assessment. So we would expect our students to exhibit their work, to be able to demonstrate their learning, to be able to talk about what they've done, and also to talk about what learning has occurred while they're doing those projects. So this is the remote learning policy, and up tonight for the first reading of the Board of Education. Do you have any questions about the remote learning policy, or attendance policy actually? Oh, okay. The second policy, and the one that actually has a lot of attention to it, is a brand new policy. It's 8450.01. It's the protective facial coverings during pandemic and epidemic events. And Board, you know that I've said to our staff, it seems like the sand keeps shifting under our feet. And true enough, true story on this particular draft, our Board Policy Subcommittee met on Tuesday night and worked through the language very diligently. And it was live streamed, so I think we had a lot of folks watching the hard work that occurred that night. The board members, Mrs. Gordon and Mrs. DeFabio, came to a conclusion as to how they wanted to present this to you tonight. The following day, Governor DeWine had a new order, and now the new order would suggest that students in kindergarten through grade 12 must wear masks to school. And so the work that the committee did, and you have a copy of this policy, will need to be changed, amended during the actual board conversation after the second motion, because currently the way the draft reads is that students in grades 2nd and higher shall wear a face mask unless they are unable to do so for the health or developmental reason. Efforts will be made to reduce any social stigma for a student who for medical or developmental reasons cannot and should not wear a mask. Then their second point from the meeting of the other night said students in kindergarten and grade 1 are strongly recommended to wear face masks unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. And further, the board suggested that preschool students will be encouraged to wear face masks unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. Following Governor DeWine's order now from yesterday, there is a recommendation from the committee that this language would actually be changed, and I can read that now if you like, Mr. Curtis.
Please.
So Mrs. Gordon sent communication since she's not here this evening, and she's recommending the following language replace what is here, and that language would say, students shall wear a face mask in any and all grades in accordance with requirements and recommendations of state, county, and local governing bodies, including the governor's office and Board of Health departments, unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. Efforts will be made to reduce any social stigma for a student who for medical or developmental reasons cannot and should not wear a mask. So Mrs. Gordon is suggesting that the wording that we worked through on Tuesday night be replaced by that. And then I have 2 further recommendations of my own for your consideration. And it doesn't mention in the order what to do with preschool, and I think our parents would like to have some guidance. And I think the guidance from the other night still should hold, and that language was preschool students will be encouraged to wear face masks unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. Just so that there's some guidance and policy for the youngest of our children. And then, what else did I say here? And With regard to the recommendations from asking, they have come from the state and from the county offices. Mrs. Gordon is inclusive of local governing bodies. I just didn't know if the board wanted to put local governing bodies in their policy or leave it at state and county governing bodies. So, things to consider this evening.
Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to item F for the administrative reports, and I'm going to circle right back to you, Mrs. Powers, so that you can introduce Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Well, Mr. Fallon, you're finally here. It seems like we've had this ongoing phone call relationship since February, December, something like that. And Mr. Fallon's company, Fallon Research and Communications, was the organization commissioned by the board to do our phone survey with regard to the Conceptual Legacy Project. So this evening, he's bringing to you the results of that survey, interesting results, and it will surely further a conversation amongst yourselves and our community as to whether or not the board should continue to pursue this important project. Good evening.
Thank you. Better late than never.
Yeah.
I appreciate you having me here this evening. I won't take up too much of your time, but briefly to introduce myself, as Superintendent Powers said, my name is Paul Fallon. I'm with Fallon Research and Communications. I work in 40 different states, although I'm based here in Ohio, and among the areas of specialization I have are education and public funding issues and facility needs. So I'm going to be presenting the results of a survey. Let me talk first and foremost about the way the data was gathered. This was conducted through a combination of telephone interviews and secure SMS texts of 485 registered voters in the Twinsburg City School District. For 485 responses, the overall estimated margin of sampling error is plus or minus 4.44%, although it varies for each individual question. And this survey data was collected during the period of February 10th through February 22nd. And let me talk briefly about that, because I think it's important to remember that a lot has transpired since then, and some of it may indeed be transformative and affected the way people look at various topics, not the least of which is their relationship with school buildings and how needs for the future might be perceived. So it's certainly possible that that has changed, much like our images, which have changed over time, because none of us look like our high school yearbook photos anymore. So too has public opinion. It's dynamic, not static. So that's important to remember. The data for the survey was stratified so the differences in vital characteristics are all presented in proportion to the percentages of the electorate. We do that to prevent over or under sampling from distorting the results. And due to rounding, not all the results went out to 100%, and the data is presented in a slightly different order than the questions were asked in order to create some subject-specific modules. A couple of key terms that I'm going to mention with which I'd like to familiarize you. First and foremost, parents. It merely refers to people who at the time of the survey had a child enrolled in the school system. Non-parents are those people who do not have children enrolled in the school system, although some of them may indeed be parents because their children were either attending a private school or not yet of school age. Future parents are those people who at the time of the survey indicated that it was likely that they would enroll their children in a district school within the next 5 years. Staunch supporters refers to those people who indicated that they would support all three of the prospective bond issues that we tested during the survey. Ambivalent supporters are those people who said they would support at least one, but not all three of the bond issues. And non-supporters are those people who were either against all three of the bond issues or they were unsure about them. Unaffiliated voters refers to those people who are neither Republicans nor Democrats. And again, this was a survey of registered voters. And lastly, highest propensity refers to those people who had a history of voting in recent even year November general elections. First and foremost, I'm going to be talking about preference groups. As I mentioned, staunch supporters are those people who indicated they would support all three of the bond issues. They were 19% overall. However, among 18 to 44-year-olds, it was 28%. So there was a higher level of staunch support among 18 to 44-year-olds. And as you can see, it cascades downward, is 18% among 45 to 64-year-olds, and 10% of respondents 65 and older were staunch supporters. There were no statistically significant differences by gender. Among parents, 22% were staunch supporters, and among non-parents, it was 18%. Looking at ambivalent supporters, that is those people who said they were voting for at least one, but not all three, was 45% overall. Among 18 to 44-year-olds, 56% were staunch supporters, ambivalent supporters. It gets down to a low of 41% among respondents 65 and older. It's 41% among homeowners, but 62% among renters. 29% among Republicans. 49% of unaffiliated voters were ambivalent supporters. 55% of parents were ambivalent supporters, compared to 43% of non-parents, and 66% of future parents were ambivalent supporters. Also, among non-supporters, it was 36% overall. Now, looking at the opinion environment, one of the first questions that we asked on the survey was known as the right direction, wrong track question. Probably of very little probative value to you, but there are a couple of reasons we start with innocuous questions like this. First and foremost, it's an easy question to answer, so it bolsters the respondent's confidence in his or her ability to complete the survey. But secondly, it also can draw them into the survey. And we know that if we get respondents past about the second or third question, they'll usually finish it. As you can see, at the time the survey was taken, which again was in February, among voters in the Twinsburg City School District, 45% said Summit County was moving in the right direction, 6% said it had gotten off onto the wrong track, 26% volunteered mixed opinions, and 23% were unsure. Now, just to give you some idea of what this data means comparatively, ideally you want the right direction figure to be at or above 60%, and the wrong track figure to be at or below 20%. When we asked Twinsburg City School District voters about the Twinsburg City School District, 51% said it was moving the right direction, and 17% said it had gotten off onto the wrong track. Among parents, 57% said the Twinsburg City School District was moving the right direction, and 16% said it had gotten off onto the wrong track, almost at those ideal thresholds. And among non-parents, 50% said the school district was moving the right direction, 17% said it had gotten off onto the wrong track. I also want to point out, too, that 17% of non-parents were unsure. We also asked, do you think that property taxes in the area where you live are too high, generally pretty fair, or too low? Now, just to give you some idea how I interpret data like this, when the extreme response option, which in this case is too high, equals or exceeds the more moderate response option, which in this case is pretty fair, I say that's something important. That's an emotional trigger point. In this case, however, it did not. Too high was 35%. Pretty fair, the more moderate response option was 55% of statistical majority. 2% said it's too low, and 8% were unsure. Among staunch supporters, just 15% said taxes were too high. Among ambivalent supporters, as people who supported one of the three bond issues, it's 26%. Among non-supporters, 55% said taxes are too high. Now remember that, because we're starting to paint the picture here so you can understand reasons why people might not support the bond issue. A couple of other important subgroup results I want to point out. First and foremost, among parents, 30% said taxes were too high, compared to 35% among non-parents. Also, 37% of homeowners said taxes were too high, compared to just 15% for renters. We also asked, how would you rate the quality of education being provided by the Twinsburg City School District? As you can see, a total of 75% said excellent or good, 13% said fair, 4% said poor or very poor, and 8% were unsure. Looking at the horizontal bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen, among the most important subgroup results were first and foremost among staunch supporters, 83% in total said excellent or good. Among ambivalent supporters, 81% said excellent or good. But what was most impressive to me is that even among non-supporters, 64%, a statistical majority, and a robust majority said quality of education was excellent or good. Also, among parents, 77% said excellent or good. It was not statistically significant when we compared them with non-parents at 75% or future parents at 70%. We also asked, how would you rate the job that the Twinsburg City School District does spending tax money and managing its budget? As you can see, 51% said excellent or good, 23% said fair, 12% said poor or very poor, and 14% were unsure. Before I go to the subgroup results, I want to mention that I tell my clients, ideally, you want to be at the 50% threshold for this particular measure. And you just barely exceed that. I also want to mention, too, that you probably surmise that there's a disparity between the rating for the quality of education and the rating for the job being done spending and managing tax dollars. That's not unusual. We see that quite frequently, and there are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is, unlike the quality of education, where you've got a lot of indicators such as college acceptance, graduation rates, state report card test scores, you don't have those for spending tax dollars, and so it's hard for people to formulate opinions about this issue. There just aren't a lot of telltale indicators, and as a result, people tend to be more conservative in their assessments. But nevertheless, that's a good score overall. Among staunch supporters, 62% said you're doing an excellent or good job spending tax money and managing the budget. Among ambivalent supporters, it was 55%. You drop below the 50% threshold for non-supporters at 39%. Also, among parents, there were no statistically significant differences at 52% when we compare them with non-parents at 50%. Now, looking at facilities, which is the marquee topic of this particular survey, one of the questions we started with was what's known as the split sample test, in which we randomly assigned respondents to one of two versions of the same question. For example, half of the respondents were asked, in general, do you think that the George G. Dodge Intermediate School building is in good condition, adequate condition, poor condition, or do you not have enough information about this to inform an opinion? As you can see from the vertical bar chart at the top of the screen, 9% said it's in good condition, 26% said it is in adequate condition, 20% said it was in poor condition, 27%, a statistical plurality, just said they had no opinion, and another 18% were unsure. So what this indicates is that the condition of the building is not understood by a large portion of the community's electorate. In version B, we asked the very same question, except we added a couple words. It reads, in general, do you think that the George G. Dodge Intermediate School building, which was built in 1970, so we provide a framework, a reference, to indicate to people that it was a 50-year-old building, is in good condition, adequate condition, poor condition, or do you not have enough information about this to form an opinion? Well, the results were almost identical. There were no statistically significant differences when we compared the two outcomes. In version B, which included the reference to the year of inception, 9% said good, 21% said adequate, 20% said poor. Once again, a plurality at 29% had no opinion, and another 20% were unsure. And as you can see, I broke out the parent results at the bottom, and they're fairly similar. Although among parents in version A, without the reference to the building, 12% said it was in good condition, which is actually higher than it was for the general public. 29% said adequate condition, 28% said poor condition, 19% had no opinion, and 12% were unsure. In the alternative version, which again includes the reference to the year it was built, among parents, 19% said it was in good condition, substantially higher than it was for the general public. 10% said adequate, 32% said poor, 11% said no opinion, and 19% were unsure. So not even parents are fully attuned to the state of the building at this point in time. And in a word or two, there's just no consensus about this matter. We also asked, as you may or may not know, the Twinsburg City School District is considering some possible options for new and reconfigured school buildings, including the Dodge Intermediate School building. How much news and information have you heard or read about this? This is an awareness test and a kind of filter of sorts to get some sense of how informed people are. It also gives us a sense, too, of what our information effort needs to look like in terms of the quantity and magnitude. As you can see, at the time the survey was taken, 4% said they'd heard of a lot of information, 22% some information, for a total of 26% informed awareness, which was pretty low. As you can see from the horizontal bar chart at the right-hand side of the screen, among staunch supporters, 31% had heard a lot or some information, compared to 29% for ambivalent supporters and 20% for non-supporters. Those were statistically significant differences, but not substantial ones, in my opinion. Clearly, there's an opportunity here. Now, once again, because the survey was done in February, this may have changed. I also want to point out, too, even among parents, only 38% at the time the survey was taken had heard a lot or some information. We also wanted to test the rationales. So we asked, if you learn that because of its age and condition, the architects who inspected the building say that it is too costly to repair, would you be more or less likely to support replacing the Dodge Intermediate School, or would it make no difference in your decision? 59% overall said that information would make them more likely to support the idea. 8% said less likely, 26% said it made no difference, and 7% were unsure. As you can see from the horizontal bar charts below, among staunch supporters, 77% said that information would make them more likely to support the plan. 75% of ambivalent supporters said it would make them more likely. Among non-supporters, 31% were more likely. So it's not quite as efficacious for those people who are against it. Among parents, 67% said they'd be more likely compared to 58% for non-parents. Overall, it will be an important piece of information to present as you're informing the public about your plans. We also asked, if you learn that because existing bonds will be expiring at the same time the new ones would begin to be collected, that amount of tax money you would be paying each year will stay about the same, would you be more or less likely to support replacing the Dodge Intermediate School building, or would it make no difference in your decision? Learning that made 54% more likely to support the plan, 6% less likely, 34% said it made no difference, and 6% were unsure. Above the 50% threshold in terms of impact, once again, among staunch supporters, 59% said that information would make them more likely to support the plan. Among ambivalent supporters, 67% said more likely. Among non-supporters, 35% were more likely. And 51% of parents were more likely, compared to 55% of non-parents. Do you have a question, sir?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. We then looked at some of the individual aspects of the plan and break them down to understand which particular aspects were perhaps most important for people to know and how they felt about them. For example, we asked, do you think it's a good or bad idea to make vital repairs and upgrades to the other school buildings so they have new roofs and modern climate control systems which are more cost effective to operate? 83% said that was a good idea, a whopping 83%. That's an exceedingly high number. 60% said it was a good idea to construct a new transportation facility where the Dodge Intermediate School is currently located, since the existing transportation facility needs to be replaced because of its age and size, which cannot accommodate the district buses. 52% said it was a good idea upon learning that they will transfer the first grade students to the Samuel Bissell Elementary School so that Wilcox Primary School can be used as an early learning center for preschool and kindergarten programs. 52% also said it was a good idea to build a new annex between the Twinsburg Public Library and Twinsburg High School, where library opportunities would be enhanced for the entire community. Now we drop below the 50% threshold. 48% said it was a good idea to replace the Dodge Intermediate School building with a new one that would be located next to the high school in order to create a campus for grades 6 through 12 with separate buildings for younger and older students. 37% said it would be a good idea to replace the Dodge Intermediate School building with a new one at the same location. And lastly, 33% said it would be a good idea to relocate Tiger Stadium to the high school campus and build a new 4th through 6th grade school on the current stadium site. And actually 42%, a statistical plurality, said that was a bad idea. Now, among parents, as you can see, the rank order is almost the same. 90% said it was a good idea to make vital repairs and upgrades. 72% said it was a good idea to construct a new transportation facility. 62% said it was a good idea to build a new annex between the library and the high school. That actually rose the highest when we compared parents and non-parents. 55% said it was a good idea to transfer the students to the Samuel Bissell Elementary School. 53% said it was a good idea to replace the Dodge Intermediate School building with a new one. Now we dropped below the 50% threshold. 48% said it was a good idea to relocate Tiger Stadium, and 39% said it was a good idea to replace the Dodge Intermediate School building with a new one at the same location. Now, I also wanted to look at one other group. This is a combination of those people who were the staunch supporters, that is, the ones who supported all 3 bond issues, and the ambivalent supporters, the ones who supported at least one of the 3. Among them, 90% said it was a good idea to make vital repairs and upgrades to the other school buildings. 72% said it was a good idea to construct a new transportation facility. 62% said it was a good idea to replace the Dodge Intermediate School building with a new one. 60% said it was a good idea to transfer the 1st grade students to Samuel Bissell Elementary School. 60% said it was a good idea to build a new annex between the library and high school. Now we dropped below the 50% threshold. 47% said it was a good idea to replace the Dodge Intermediate School with a new one. And 45% said it was a good idea to relocate Tiger Stadium to the high school campus. And that performs substantially better than it did among the other groups at 45%. At the end of the survey, we did 3 tests to find out whether or not people would vote for particular bond issue scenarios. For example, one plan was to replace the existing Dodge Intermediate School building with a new one at the same location, make vital repairs and upgrades to the other buildings so they have roofs and modern climate control systems. We would be funded with a 30-year, $40 million bond issue that would cost property owners about $7 each month. In that version, 45% said they would vote for it, 39% against it, and 16% were unsure. When you factor in the estimated margin of sampling error for the survey, that 45% could be as high as 49% to as low as 41%. So you're almost on the threshold of having a majority of support. Looking at the horizontal bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen, there were no statistically significant differences in support, with 48% of parents saying they'd vote for it compared to 46% of non-parents. Among men, 41% said they'd vote for it, compared to 49% for women. There was an 8% gender gap there. Also, among homeowners, 43% would vote for it, compared to 66% of renters. Also, among Democrats, 46% would vote for it, compared to 32% of Republicans and 49% of unaffiliated voters. Now, what that tells me is that you're going to have a different outcome if you put this on the ballot during a primary election when, say, only one of the 2 parties' nominations is competitive and there is a lopsided turnout. So, for example, if you put this on during a primary where the Democrat nomination had already been sewn up but the Republican one was still competitive, this might perform substantially lower at the ballot box. Also want to point out, too, among the highest propensity voters, 44% were for it compared to 45% overall. Looking at another scenario, which was to replace the Dodge Intermediate School building with a new one that would be located next to the high school and make vital repairs and upgrades to the other buildings so they have new roofs and modern climate control systems. It also would be funded with a 30-year, $45 million bond issue that would cost property owners about $8 each month in additional taxes for each $100,000 of property value. In that scenario, 42% said they'd vote for it, and actually 44%, a plurality, said they'd vote against it, and 14% were unsure. looking a little more closely at that 42% who said they'd vote for it, when you factor in sampling variability within the confidence interval for the margin of error, that 42% could be as high as about 46% to as low as about 38%. So now you're getting away from that majority threshold you need for approval. Also, among parents, 54% said they'd vote for it, but 39% of non-parents would vote for it, and actually 46% of plurality would vote against it. And that's important here because you have more non-parents than you have parents as voters in this district. Also want to point out, too, that among homeowners, 40% said they'd vote for it, while 46% said they'd vote against it. In contrast, 56% of renters would vote for it and 31% against it. And once again, we saw a substantial difference by party registration. 46% of Democrats would vote for it, compared to 32% of Republicans and 44% of unaffiliated voters. And I want to point out, too, that among Republicans, 60% were against it. And in the last scenario, we tested the idea of replacing the existing Dodge Intermediate School with a new one that would be located on the current Tiger Stadium site, relocate Tiger Stadium next to the Twinsburg High School, make vital repairs and upgrades to the other school buildings so they have new roofs and modern climate control systems, build a new transportation facility, and construct an annex building between the library and high school. It would be funded with a 30-year, $60 million bond issue that would cost property owners about $11 each month in additional taxes for each $100,000 property value. In this scenario, 36% said they'd vote for it. The statistical majority, 50%, said they'd vote against it, and 14% were unsure here. So as you can see here, what's happened is there's an inverse relationship between the amount of the bond issue and prospective support. Probably not surprising. The more it costs, the lower the level of support. Among parents, as you can see in the horizontal bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen, 48% were in support compared to 32% of non-parents, and 56% of non-parents were actually against it. 36% of men are voting for it compared to 35% of women. However, that was a statistically significant difference, by and large, because this majority of men at 55% were against it compared to 48% of women. Also, among homeowners and renters, 35% of the former are supporting it compared to 43% of the latter, and that's noteworthy because renters are now below the 50% threshold as well, and you're below the 50% threshold with all three party groups, with 31% of Democrats voting for it compared to 26% of Republicans and 40% of unaffiliated voters. A couple of caveats is to think about and ponder as you're contemplating this information. Remember that these were concept tests, so we used colloquial wording to present them, but the wording that would be required by law that voters would see if they went into the booth would be considerably different. And that's important because the language is structured in such a way that it can be a little bit daunting. It's a little bit longer, and as a result, sometimes things get lost in translation when you go from a concept to actual ballot language. Second, the order in which the three types of bond issue questions were presented was rotated in order to prevent a question order effect. Third, although many campaigns have succeeded with lower initial support, the ideal standard for undertaking a campaign is 55%, and the generally accepted minimum is 50% in order to withstand erosion of support, which often happens during the course of an election. And lastly, the static measures the bond issue results or baseline tests to gauge intentions at the time the study was conducted, so they cannot reflect the effects of dynamic and changing opinions, especially when you've had an intervening event such as the one we're experiencing right now with the pandemic. So that warrants as much emphasis as anything. Lastly, before I open the floor for any questions, I want to recap the presentation and call attention to the things that I thought were most important in a narrative fashion. First and foremost, the overall opinion environment was a propitious one, with no indications that there was any underlying disenchantment that could cast a pall over the district or taint decisions about facility needs. Simply put, they like the job you're doing educating kids, and they like the job you're doing managing tax dollars. Next, ratings for the quality of education were consistently high among the myriad of different subgroups. There was nothing to suggest that the outcome of the bond issue would be a referendum on what has happened in the classrooms. Remember, even the non-supporters think you're doing a great job. 64% said quality of education is excellent or good. For the enemies like that, who needs friends? Next, most aspects of the potential facilities plan met with favorable reactions and could help bolster interest and support for the idea. Next, among the funding options tested, the $40 million plan received the most support at the time of the survey, and some more support among parents could grow as they learn more about the concept and the overall impact on the school system. Next, opposition to facilities appeared to be due to monetary considerations. And that's important to remember here because that's a more difficult concept to address in the public, and the monetary considerations in many instances are due to a myriad of different effects and impacts rather than a single one, such as job losses and mortgage payments and other considerations. Next, notably, non-supporters also gave the district high marks for the quality of education, suggesting that they're not ardent naysayers and frankly probably consider themselves to be supporters otherwise. And lastly, there were no survey results which indicated that the facilities plan was not potentially viable, or that further exploration of the idea would be ill-advised. Lastly, I wanted to point out one other thing. I wanted to probably put a little more additional emphasis on this because I thought it was important. But as I said earlier, 35% of the respondents said the taxes were too high. When we looked at the responses among just those who said taxes were too high, support for the $40 million bond issue was at 29%. Support for the $45 million bond issue was at 21%. And support for the $60 million bond issue was at 20%. Simply put, this is largely about money as much as anything else. With that, I'd like to open the floor for any questions anyone has.
Wow, I mean, that's a lot of information to take in, and I really appreciate how comprehensive it is. You know, it's you know, it makes for, you know, understanding things that we definitely need to do or, you know, should do better. You know, one thing that stood out to me was communication and informing the public about some things. I find it ironic considering how much time we put into hosting forums, putting out as much information as we did. We went to every municipality and we presented to their respective bodies around this project. I can't remember a time during this time that we didn't stop talking. We were constantly talking about it. So obviously there's something that we're missing because when we do a survey, it's not reflective of the efforts that we made to inform the public. So that's one thing that stood out to me. One thing that is not surprising to me is that what we've always known is that I think this community does support the district from an achievement standpoint. We know that people move here simply, you know, primarily for the quality of the school district. So it feels good. That validates a lot of what we already know, and also from a you know, monetary standpoint and you know, managing the money. You know, I know that we take a lot into consideration. We try to be extremely frugal and fiscally responsible in a lot of the decisions that we make. Yeah, and I'm glad that reflects that as well. So those are some things that you know, that validate a lot of what I felt personally. What concerns me, you know, I think that had we not been in a situation of a pandemic where it has adversely affected a lot of our residents, not only here in Twinsburg, but, you know, throughout the nation, I'm not exactly sure how valid or useful some of the information that you presented is at this point in time for decision making moving forward in the future. You know, I think that it's extremely useful information, but I wonder if there are families and people that responded, you know, favorably to some of the bond issues, whether or not that is still the case, considering where we are right now, economically.
I had that question as well.
Mhm.
And as a result, some of the survey work we're doing now is starting to reflect that.
Mhm.
School districts are starting to ask about new things that we've never tested before, like much more spacious classrooms that can allow for social distancing,
Mhm.
things of that nature.
Yeah.
It is indeed a different world we're living in.
Yeah, so, I mean, those are my immediate reactions to the presentation. I do appreciate, again, the depth of, the depth with which you go, your organization goes to kind of lay all this out, because I do feel that it's extremely useful, and if we weren't in this time, I think that this would have been critical in allowing us to make an informed decision to move forward in doing something.
I had similar concern. I don't know if there's any way to statistically put this data up against like a 2008 recession and data that was collected in 2007 versus 8, and if there's even a percentage. I don't know if that's even possible, nor would that be accurate. I look forward to pouring over all the data, because that was quite a bit. But a couple things jump out at me. First and foremost, we have not run a campaign. So while we think we're educating and we think we're getting out to a lot of people, in reality it really was just a small sampling of folks that have even heard concepts of a plan. So that's important. And also what you pointed out with, I think if I understood you correctly, people were responsive to expert opinions, i.e. architects. So if architects and mechanical engineers and folks are saying, here's the reality of the situation, that again could be fodder for a campaign. Should we move forward on that?
I think it would be very important support.
Right. And even though we had architects and we had plans and we had multiple variations, I'm not sure. Again, we have not run a campaign in the traditional sense, that we've done.
This is, I should point out that this is not a campaign survey.
No,
It
it's
could not be used for that purpose.
right. It's just to get
General sentiments
Right.
of the community. I would like to address something that you both touched on, though. You're probably a little bit dismayed about the lack of penetration in reaching the community about this topic, but paradoxically, in the information age, it's actually harder to reach people rather than easier. And efforts need to be more carefully orchestrated and sustained and enduring. So I suspect that based on my interactions with Mrs. Powers and the rest of the staff, that there was only so much that had been done at that point in time.
Sure.
But you've got something that many of my clients don't have. It's sometimes in 911, I'm the guy you call when there's a problem. And the good news is there's not a problem here. You do a great job of educating your children, and that provides a vast reservoir of trust and confidence that you can also draw upon when you're engaging the public. And not every government institution I work for can say that.
And other indicators that I saw, because we didn't specifically talk that much about a bond, replacement and a no new taxes approach. So that was interesting that we do have that support there as well. And again, pointing towards the expert interviews. Being a nonpartisan political, body, it's interesting to have to weigh into effect, the partisan side, and that's what's going on with a particular race. At the time we make a decision, a particular sub-party's race, could completely change a turnout. But I think your reflection on special elections versus primaries versus general elections should be, at least, part of our decision on timing. So those were the things that jumped out to me. We know our enrollment is where that's trending, and we know the community is, a great place to live, hence people aren't moving. Meaning, you see new homes, but, the turnover and such is that people are staying, and the kids are graduating and they're moving out. So that's an impact. I don't know how much percentage of the 485 registered were actual rental versus homeowner So I don't know if that's able to be teased out, because I
I've
know
got
it's.
that information,
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah,
can
I mean, I think that's
send
important.
Mrs. Cox. I think it was in the, cross-tabulative data that I sent her,
Right.
but if not, I'll be glad to do
Right.
so.
And was there intent or results that reflective of percentage of the various three subdivision, or political, entities that we have, a city, a township, and a village? I
And,
don't know.
as I said, the data was stratified to
Was it?
prevent over-undersampling of any group, and
That
one of the
would- yeah,
ways that
okay.
it was done was geographically.
Okay, I mean, I think, like I said, we've got a lot of data to pour over, but we got a pandemic to get through first.
And I'm more of a visual person. I have to see everything right in front of me and analyze, versus auditory. And so I know that I'm sure I'll have questions once I really dig deeper. But yeah, there's a lot of information, a lot of good information. We know that can fluctuate with what's been going on, but I will be having questions later.
Consider me at your disposal. Mrs. Powers has my contact information, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions you might have.
Paul, do you have any recommendations for the board at this time, based on the pandemic, based on what feedback you've presented tonight?
Well, I think first and foremost is you're going through the process of trying to decide how you're going to deliver education and getting to a point where you've got a consensus about it and there's an understanding, and I know you're just really broaching that frontier. It could still change, hopefully it won't, but there's certainly a possibility. I've got a number of school systems I'm working with that in the last few days have decided to make a change in what they intended to do just a few weeks ago. So I think getting over that first hurdle is going to be the key. And secondly, you may have to evaluate what kinds of different building needs you might have as a result of this crisis before talking substantively about the plans, because I think that people are going to have some new and different expectations of buildings.
I would also infer that the amount of communications from the district to our parents since March 13th is probably not only tremendous but overwhelming. And that could very well be a positive impact, because they've seen the hard work of the administration, the teachers, and the enormous plans that have had to be developed. And what I'm saying is, we may have penetrated a whole bunch of people that were just happy moving along, and now they see, a tremendous amount of work being done. So it'd be interesting to see the favorability of, rating of the district even now, because every indication, while nobody's loving the situation we're in, we seem to be getting fairly positive feedback, at least on our approach to the situation. I mean, that's just my guess, and I don't have anything statistical because we haven't surveyed.
With that, then, I want to thank you for having me here this evening, and hope the start of the school year goes smoothly. Feel free to reach out if you've got any other questions or would like to discuss this in greater detail.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice
Thank
evening.
you.
Paul.
Okay, as I understand it, we do have, something for remonstrance. So, I will go ahead and read the passage for remonstrance, prior to moving forward with what we have. Persons wishing to address the Board of Education should submit a blue card found in the lobby to the treasurer prior to the meeting, so that they may be recognized by the board president and welcome to make comment. No formal action will be taken on subjects that are not included on this agenda until the board has had an opportunity to study them. Comments regarding personnel must be submitted in writing through the office of the superintendent. Although there is normally adequate time for citizens to express themselves at a board meeting, if several people wish to speak, each person will be allotted 5 minutes until the total time of 30 minutes is used. Each person addressing the board is asked to give his or her name and address. That being said, I just want to preface that this was a request that was sent and asked to be read, which is typical of our process if we were in a virtual environment. As such, considering this is our first time and given the extenuating circumstances in which we find ourselves with COVID-19, I'm going to make an exception for this to be read as part of remonstrance at this time. I will read it. It was sent by Mr. Paul Levine. He is a resident. He lives at 9337 Adam Run. And I will read. Hello, Board of Education. I would like to address the June 24th meeting. During the meeting, one of the board members' names was used multiple times during remonstrance. The board president did not censor the use of the name. A couple of years ago, I tried to address one of the board members directly due to a complaint I had against them. I was told I was not allowed to do so by the same members still on the board. When I look on the school website under public concerns, it currently says that all statements should be directed to the presiding officer. No person may address or question board members individually. I'd like to understand what changed. It seems unfair that some people can be addressed directly and others cannot. Who makes that decision? Thank you, Paul Levine. Okay.
Mr. President, is there no other remonstrance?
There is no other remonstrance.
Well, we typically don't address remonstrance. I think this is not unprecedented that we haven't, that we do address. This is interesting that this is referring to a situation that's 3+ years ago. So a recollection of the actual words may be different. But I do recall that I was the member of the board, not the presiding officer, that made a point of order. At the time, from my recollection, there was fairly heated comments that were not related at all to board business that this particular individual had with another board member. And if I recall, it was something to do with social media. It was, again, not board-related business. During the June 24th meeting, actually multiple board members' names were mentioned, but questions were not directly, from what I recall, directed to a particular board member. Again, the complaints that were made on the 24th were directly related to board business. Prior to this remonstrance, I believe we had a legal discussion with our legal counsel, and there may be some inaccuracies in understanding of the policy. Employees that are public employees that report and are directly responsible under the superintendent are just that, are public employees that have various systems and HR rules that need to be followed regarding public complaints. Public elected officials, on the other hand, do not report to the superintendent or treasurer, and they do report directly to the public, and that needs to be considered. Comments that I believe at the time were antagonistic, and the point of order I made at the time was my belief that that board member was a public employee and should not be attacked at that time. That is different, I believe, than the comments that were made on the 24th with respect to board business. Again, on the 3+ years, my recollection is that had nothing to do with board business at the time. The 24th, no one in any of the letters read, I believe, questioned someone directly. That is a very different situation. So I think the legal opinion that we have is that we believe in an open, public, two-way conversation regarding board and school business. And that's, I think, Mr. Kirst, you were the presiding officer at the time. I don't know if your recollection is any different, but I believe the two situations were completely different, whether I was out of order with respect to indicating that I thought the board member was a public employee, even though we are employed by the district. That time it was not board-related business at all, whereas this was public comments that we received, I believe 6 or 7 letters, directly relating and mentioning multiple board members, not just one in particular.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item H, which is the treasurer's report recommendations. Without objection from my colleagues, I will read H 1 through 3 together. H1, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the following meeting minutes: regular meeting of June 3rd and June 24th, 2020, and special meeting of June 29th, 2020, as sent to the board under separate cover. 2, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the following financial reports for the month of June 2020: Bank Reconciliation, General Fund Financial Summary Report, and Financial Report by Fund, as sent to the board under separate cover. And 3, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the check register for the month of June 2020. The total, including payroll, is $4,336,006.71. Do I have a motion for H1 through 3?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Felber. Discussion. Hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Felber?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes. Item passes 3-0. Excuse me. Next is item I, action items. Personnel, without objection from my colleagues, I will read them I 1 through 3 together. 1, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the certificated licensed personnel and/or contract recommendations detailed in the attached exhibit as per the dates, terms, and other applicable conditions specified pending satisfactory ORC background checks. 2, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the classified personnel and/or contract recommendations detailed in the attached exhibit as per the dates, terms, and other applicable conditions specified pending satisfactory ORC background checks. And 3, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the supplemental contract recommendations detailed in the attached exhibit as per the dates, terms, and other applicable conditions specified pending satisfactory ORC background checks. Do I have a motion for items I 1 through 3?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Felber. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Davis. Discussion?
Just one comment, since we're in motions, and I should have made it maybe in H. None of the business before us tonight on the agenda requires what's called a supermajority or a majority prior, or larger than what we have. We do have 3 board members present. I just thought, this doesn't happen that often, so the public watching knows and sees that there's 3 board members. That is a legal majority for this board to conduct business. I just thought that should be noted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Felber. We do have a quorum. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Curtis, if I might interject here, typically we would have had our 2 new administrators with us this evening, but because of the social distancing requirement of less than 10 for a mass gathering, they are not with us this evening. I want to ask Mr. Sullen if he would please come forward and introduce our 2 new administrators. We have Emily Williamson Hunt, who is our new assistant principal at our high school level, and then we have Jennifer Gates. She will be replacing Miss Julianne Walker, who is temporarily being transferred to cover our first grade children at Bissell. And Miss Gates is recommended this evening for a 1-year contract to fill that temporary void with our 4th, 5th, and 6th grade children. So Mr. Sullen has both of their resumes, and he just wants to introduce them to you as far as their credentials go, where they've been before coming to us, and then answer any questions that you might have. Good evening, Tim.
Good evening, Board of Education, Twinsburg community. I wanted to take this time to introduce 2 of our newest Tiger members. First, I would like to take the time to introduce Miss Emily Williamson Hunt. She will be the assistant principal at Twinsburg High School. Ms. Hunt received her bachelor's degree in education with a focus in English from Case Western Reserve University. Emily received her first full-time teaching position with Maple Heights City Schools, and it was during this time that Ms. Hunt pursued and received her master's degree in educational administration from Ashland University. After 5 years with Maple Heights City Schools, Ms. Hunt received an offer to teach English with Euclid City Schools. This was especially exciting as it was home for her. For the next 10 years, Emily taught middle and high school English. In 2017, Ms. Hunt was promoted to the Dean of Students at Euclid High School and has loved every aspect of it. So, after 17 years as an English teacher and 3 years as a Dean of Students, Ms. Hunt was ready to take the next step and become an assistant principal for Twinsburg High School. We're excited to welcome her to our Tiger family. Next, I would like to introduce you to Mrs. Jennifer Gates. She will be the new assistant principal at George G. Dodge Intermediate School. Mrs. Gates received her bachelor's degree in moderate intensive special education from Cleveland State University. Jennifer then began her career as an intervention specialist, working closely with severe emotional behavioral disorders in Bedford City School District. While working with Bedford City Schools, Mrs. Gates pursued a master's degree in educational administration through Cleveland State University. Most recently, Mrs. Gates worked as a behavioral specialist for Bedford City Schools, a position that gave her the opportunity to coach teachers kindergarten through 12th grade. This role provided her the opportunity to coach, lead, and support teachers in their instruction and classroom management strategies. Jennifer was an active leader in many school-wide activities, committees, and initiatives. These initiatives and committees included the PBIS, MTSS, which is the multi-tiered system of supports, building leadership team, and district leadership teams. Jennifer's dedication to education led her to being honored as the Stellar Staff Award winner in 2018 and currently receiving tenure in 2020 for the Bedford City Schools. We're excited to welcome Mrs. Gates to our Tiger family. Any questions?
No, I would just like to acknowledge that the Department and Administrative continues to attract and go through a very difficult process of vetting talent. So we appreciate your efforts, and these sound like great Tigers to welcome.
Yes, we're really excited. Thank you so much.
Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Felber,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis,
Yes. And that item passes 3-0. I would also like to congratulate Ms. Hunt and Mrs. Gates. Welcome to the family. Okay, moving on is items J, action items, new business. And without objection from my colleagues, I will read items J1 through 17 together. J1, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the job description for virtual academy assistant principal per the attached exhibit. 2, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves a student affiliation agreement between Kent State University Healthcare Programs and the Twinsburg City School District effective July 15, 2020 through July 15, 2021 to place qualified students in the district for clinical educational opportunities in the food service department as sent to the board under separate cover. 3, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the below listing of items to be deleted from inventory. 4, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the following items to be deleted from inventory upon recommendation from the superintendent. Excuse me, they are listed. 5, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the agreement for behavioral intervention services with Solutions Behavioral Consulting, LLC, for the period of August 15, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. Consultation services will be billed at $150 per hour. Excuse me. And services provided by behavior technicians will be billed at $45 an hour, not to exceed $265,000 for the school year, as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a Title 6B fund expense. 6, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the agreement for behavioral intervention services for the extended school year program with Solutions Behavioral Consulting, LLC. The agreement is for 2 students, not to exceed 33 hours of tutoring and 6 hours of consulting. Total cost not to exceed $2,385. This is a Title 6B fund expense. 7, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the inter-district service agreement with the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio, 6392 Oak Tree Boulevard, Independence, Ohio, 44131, for the 2020-2021 school year for the following positions: gifted consultant, security liaisons, technology resource assistants, technology support specialists, network manager, special education consultant, and curriculum supervisor, per the terms detailed on the agreement as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a general fund expenditure. 8, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the agreement with the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio for a teacher of visually impaired for up to 105 hours at a rate of $98.93 per hour, and educational audiologist for up to 45 hours at a rate of $98.96 per hour, a teacher of hearing impaired up to 225 hours at a rate of $91.79 per hour, and an orientation mobility trainer for up to 20 hours at a rate of $72 per hour for the 2020-2021 school year as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a general fund expense. 9, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the revised service agreement between the Twinsburg City School District and PSI Affiliates Incorporated, PSI Associates Incorporated, for school health assistant services for the 2020 Summer Skills Camp at a cost not to exceed $1,600.20 to be billed with CARES funds as sent to the board under separate cover. 10, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the service agreement between the Twinsburg City School District and PSI Affiliates Incorporated, PSI Associates Incorporated, for licensed practical nurse services and school health assistant services for the 2020 extended school year summer program, July 21st, 2020 through August 6th, 2020, at a cost not to exceed $1,246.32 as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a general fund expense. 11, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the contract with Beechbrook, 3737 Lander Road, Cleveland, Ohio, 44124, per the terms and conditions set forth in the agreement, July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. Total cost not to exceed $211,150 as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a general fund expense. 12, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the service agreement with Education Alternatives to provide special education services for 8 students for the 2020-2021 school year, prepaid cost of $160,025, which includes $33,077 credit from the 1920 school year as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a general fund expense. 13, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the service agreement with Therapy in Motion, LLC, for the 2020-2021 school year to provide physical therapy services for students at a rate of $90 per hour, not to exceed $50,000, as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a general fund expense. 14, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the agreement with Visual Marketing Systems, 2097 East Aurora Road, Twinsburg, Ohio, in the amount of $33,809 for the purchase of clear school backpacks for students, as sent to the board under separate cover. 15, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves 2 additional days at the per diem rate for preschool, kindergarten, and grade 1 teachers to prepare classrooms for the coming school year. This is a general fund expense. 16, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the first reading of the new and revised Board of Education policy as noted below. And 17, that the Twinsburg Board of Education authorizes the treasurer to reimburse parents for fees that they paid for the following field trips scheduled during the 1920 school year and rescheduled for the 2020-2021 school year, but now must be canceled due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Washington, D.C. and Greenfield Village, proceeds from candy sales which reduce the fees for Greenfield Village will be deferred to pay students academic and/or co-extracurricular fees. Do I have a motion for items J 1 through 17?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Felber.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes, sir.
Maybe, I know we just read through everything, but I know we have some language to discuss.
Yes.
In item 16. And if we were to vote on this now, it would be the language that was presented to the board prior to this evening. So, Mr. Aho, I don't know from Robert's Rules of Orders, if we can, amend that now and then reread that language in the record?
Yeah, you can amend.
Okay. So
Make a
that's
motion
the
to
reason I
amend it.
didn't I seconded as opposed to, so Mrs. Davis, if we would have to make an amendment to 845001. I don't think there's any changes in 5200 if I'm not mistaken.
Right, I think it's just,
Does that make sense to do that as part of our discussion, and then we'd have to make a formal amendment to the language that was presented to us in the agenda prior to the meeting? Does that sound right? And then we can just continue with and obviously discuss any of the other 16. Does that make sense to everybody?
yes.
So I might suggest if there's other discussion first.
No.
For the other items.
Oh, the only thing I do want to ask, and not related to 16, is just clarification about the clear backpack, so the parents know why we have that on there.
Thank you for asking the question. I just make assumptions folks know what I'm thinking, right?
Mhm.
So in light of the fact that we are going to try to keep a congregation of children out of the hallway, which means students will not be using what is traditionally our lockers, we wanted a way for them to keep their belongings in a safe place, in a place that is visible, because these things will be in the classroom. And so the clear backpacks will provide a safe way for students to bring their Chromebooks back and forth to school, any other teaching materials that they should need. And the book bags, or backpacks, are going to actually be kept in the classroom with the child, so that things inside there are visible. And it's we talk so much about the health and the health part of safety. We cannot forget the safety part of safety, and making sure that students are making good choices and that we're ensuring that everyone is safe while they're on our campuses. So it's really a school safety piece. It's aligned to the pandemic because we're really going to try not to use our lockers. We're going to try to minimize congregation of children in the hallways and of our teenagers in the hallways, and this is the best way to do that, by providing them with the clear backpacks that they would then take things back and forth to school in.
And are they, as far as size, are they a standard? I don't know if they'd be a regular backpack size, maybe 3/4. Is there a size so that they can get an idea of how much they're able to carry in that?
You know what, Mr. Welker's in the hallway. If he could come up to the microphone, he has the measurements. We just talked through this today with our administrative team. There are two different sizes. We have the smaller backpack for the students up to grade 6, and then the older students in 7, 12, who are on campus, as far as their option, we get the larger backpack. Mr. Welker, can you explain to the board the sizing of those two?
Sure. So, hi, how are you? So the smaller book bag is 15 inches tall by 12 inches wide by a little over 3 inches deep, which is a general smaller book bag for the students in that age group. And then for grades 7 through 12, it's a 17-inch book bag, so a little taller, about the same width, and it's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches deeper. Both have water bottle holders on the sides, as well as 2 pockets, one big one and then a front pocket.
And I guess the plus of that is it's easier to clean too. It's not a cloth backpack that you're bringing home into your house. You can just wipe it down very quickly and bring it inside the house.
Right. Mr. Welker, before you step down,
Sure.
Earlier today, board, we talked in our administrative meeting about these backpacks and the Chromebook that will be placed in there on the soft reopening week for kids who don't already have them. But can you explain, a couple weeks back, the board authorized our new contract that will provide Z passes for the students. And it's a real important topic that we bring front and center to our families tonight, and so the board recognizes too that the Z passes will be attached to the backpacks when the kids get them during that soft reopening week. Can you explain what a Z pass is and why we're pretty excited about this?
Sure. So we have Z passes that are going to go on each book bag. So that's going to go on the front pocket, and the Z pass is used for transportation purposes. So it's basically a proximity reader that will allow the student to be able to walk up to the proximity reader on each bus. It'll tell the bus driver whether the student's on the correct bus or if they're getting off at the correct stop. So all that information will be instantaneously shared with our transportation department, so we have an accurate read of who's on the bus at any given time throughout the ride as well, which will be great. So we plan to do the Z Pass for those bus riders, and then we will also have a tag for those students who are not bus riders as well, so that each book bag's clearly identified and helps us with arrival and dismissal procedures.
One question that's just occurred to me, is that going to be used at all for inbound attendance or canopy in terms of those records? You know, because I know there's a time frame by which we need to notify parents if a student's not in school. I don't know if that's even possible, or.
I hadn't thought about that.
I don't
Currently,
expect an answer. It just
yeah.
kind of came up.
Yeah.
You know,
So I do know that we're communicating instantaneously with the it's using cell phone service, and so we would know what time and where a student boarded the bus and where they unloaded the bus, so we could certainly use that information.
I'm just curious if that could
to
even
help
give the administrators that have to make those calls a heads up even before the bus has landed that there's supposed to be 30 kids on the bus, there's 28. We haven't gotten a call yet, because that's all happening at that same time, and given the quite a few shifting times that we have, you're asking people to make calls at all times during the administrative day. So maybe that is something that can help relieve that burden somewhat.
Yeah, we would definitely consider using that as a piece of data, along with it could be possible that a student decides to take a ride that day versus ride the bus too.
I guess that's another consideration.
So we at least could use that as a piece of data. I'm not sure if it could be
they already may be late arrival and haven't notified the school yet and not on the bus. So yeah, I guess it's a multiple faceted.
Yeah, but good. Like, we'll definitely be a lot more data rich in our attendance, so that'll help a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Wilson. Okay, so now that we have an amendment on the floor, what I would like to suggest is, Mrs. Powers, would you mind reading the changed language for the record?
Sure, I apologize, it's in my email here. Okay, Mrs. Gordon's recommendation to change the language that before we get to that, do we not need to
I think
vote on?
we need to read the
We need to
first one.
clean this stuff off first, and then you'll take,
Okay, and then we'll.
Right.
Separate them.
yeah, it's
Well,
two
do you want to
separate things.
separate this out as a completely separate?
Yeah, why don't we,
Yes.
yeah, so I'll make
One through
a
15.
motion to separate 16, and we will actually vote on J. We'll do 1 through 16, but we'll.
Or do all of them except,
One
you're
through
not gonna
15
renumber it,
and
but I would just say
Yeah.
all of them except 16.
Yeah, all except 16. So I'll make a motion to move 16 separately. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Felber. Mr. Ayo, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Felber?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Okay. All right. 16 is separate.
So,
No.
and I think we'd probably need to read the existing language for 8450-01 and then discuss any amendments.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
You gotta vote on 1 through 16.
Oh, yes,
One
they
through-
do that
yeah.
first, yes.
1 through 17 regardless of 16.
Okay, all right, so, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Felber?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes. All right, and that's 3-0. Now we're on to separation, which is the amended language.
I think we need to first read if you have it, do you have the existing language prior to?
I do.
The governor's announcement?
Prior to.
Because
Yeah.
that's what we're amending.
Right.
Or just-
So, the language in question is on the first page of 8450.01. Near the bottom, the second box currently says, students in second grade and higher shall wear a face mask unless they are unable to do so for health or developmental reasons. Efforts will be made to reduce any social stigma for a student who, for medical or developmental reasons, cannot and should not wear a mask. And the reason the policy subcommittee has selected second grade and higher is because the grade bands of 2 and 3 are together. So they didn't want to separate out third grade doing something different than second, and that's how that decision was made. I just wanted to explain the backstory. Then the second part of that was students in kindergarten and grade 1 are strongly recommended to wear face masks unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. And then the third part was preschool students will be encouraged to wear face masks unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. So what Mrs. Gordon's recommendation says is students shall wear a face mask in any and all grades in accordance with requirements and recommendations of state, county, and local governing bodies, including the governor's office and board of health departments, unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. Efforts will be made to reduce any social stigma for a student who, for medical or developmental reasons, cannot and should not wear a mask.
Okay.
So, in her wording, she's not saying anything about the students that are outside of the order. And remember, outside of the order in this particular case happens to be preschool children.
Right.
So I didn't know if you wanted to include the statement about preschool or just make the assumption that if they're not included in the order, then those students wouldn't have to wear masks to school. At least in the current language submitted by the policy committee, it says that preschool students will be encouraged. And understand, board, some of our preschool kids are 3 years old. So for some, it will be very difficult. For others, not so much a difficult thing.
I think one of the key things here, or two key things, is one, I think we are directed by the state to have a policy. So we
Yes.
have to do that, and a lot of people might be thinking, well, why do we have to have a policy if the state's already made a decision for us? The other thing is the superintendent has the other side of the equation, which is administrative guidelines that allow her to execute the policy, that the board sees fit, as far as employees and the handbooks and so forth. So that's the reason why we need the policy. I have one, I see we're talking about state, county, local governing bodies. Part of me wonders if they could be in confliction, of each other. If a local ordinance says do one thing, but a state says this, do we need to tweak this somewhat to say, the highest authority? Because we could be in a situation where the state rescinds their order, but a county says you do this, or the first two, rescind, and the local, in this case, the city of Twinsburg, where all of our buildings, passes an ordinance. So I think we need to maybe get ahead of what could be a conflict if we could just, put something in the effect of the highest governing authority, because I imagine the state has authority over the county has authority over the local jurisdiction, unless I'm mistaken.
No, I don't think you're mistaken.
Or it's a moot point, I don't know.
No, I think I hadn't really thought of that. And I guess I hadn't because we don't have a conflict right now.
Right, that's why I'm trying to get ahead of, the ever-changing sands shifting.
Well, there's a conflict going on with athletics. So that's a case in point.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
no, okay.
That's right, always.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm fine with it. I think that slight tweak.
Yeah, we just tweak something to the effect of,
The highest governing authority.
the highest governing authority or something. So that we don't get into conflicts.
So,
I would
yeah,
assume the
so
state has.
We're always following the direction.
Right. I would imagine the state has authority over the OHSSA, but the county wouldn't, you know. I mean, they're completely different entities.
Can I
Yeah.
potentially though, so when you're saying in the sentence, or Mrs. Gordon is recommending, in accordance with requirements and recommendations of state, county, and local governing bodies, it should be and or,
And, okay.
because, there is a difference,
Right.
and, you know, we may be under one jurisdiction and not the other,
That's what I'm getting at, yeah.
right?
So and/or may cover it I mean,
At least.
so if we end up with one situation or another, we've at least covered it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, and I understand, I understand the premise, I understand the point.
Right, I just don't wanna.
You're trying to make.
Like I said, this language was presented the other day and
Yeah.
less than
And then
24
that's
hours,
happening.
Yeah.
we had to readdress it, so
No.
I don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow.
I'm fine with
The
that.
way it's written then. and
So
or.
and or.
And I would also like to see the addition of the recommendation for pre-K so that it gives at least some administrative guideline to the school district and the superintendent to say pre-K is recommended, but, again, we're not mandating it. So if, someone has a problem with someone not wearing a mask, it wasn't recommended by the state, but we're recommending it anyways. And again, we know every student, every, situation is different.
The policy committee actually used the verb encourage, understanding you're talking about 3 and 4-year-olds, some of which are students with disabilities.
Right.
And so, we talked about whether or not that verb should be recommended or encouraged, and, the 2 board members Tuesday night thought the word encourage was the better fit.
And we're not medical
Yeah.
folks, I mean.
No, we're not. And-
Yeah, I'm fine with either word.
The committee's done the work.
Yeah.
So, I'm not strongly compelled, to change that.
Okay.
Unless my colleagues
Let's
are.
leave it as it is.
Okay, so we are changing the tweak is and or.
And we're leaving the other language in
Leaving
place.
the
Okay,
language
so this is the
that's
only thing that,
proposed.
of that language that we're changing.
Yeah. Okay. Anything
So
else?
I think that if one of us has to make the request for an amendment, T and I believe, or actually, we haven't even reread this now.
So we have to reread it. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've already made the motion for the, for an amendment.
Right.
So it's just a matter of reading.
Yeah, it's just a matter of reading it into.
Reading it into the record, what we have agreed upon, and then I'll ask for a roll call. You mind?
You want me to read it?
Or
Oh.
Mrs. Powers?
I was waiting
Okay,
for her to
so
catch
then,
up.
sorry, so we're deleting the 2nd through 12th grade, requirement, and we're deleting where it says students in kindergarten and 1st grade are strongly recommended, and replacing both of those paragraphs with the following. Students shall wear a face mask in any and all grades in accordance with requirements and recommendations of state, county, and/or local governing bodies, including the governor's office and boards of health departments, unless they are unable to do so for a health or developmental reason. Efforts will be made to reduce any social stigma for a student who, for a medical or developmental reason, cannot and should not wear a mask.
Are we okay with that?
Yes.
I'm good.
All right, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Actually, we didn't have a first and a motion and a
Okay.
second.
That's what I was wondering if.
Yeah.
Right, I'm sorry.
Skip.
Do I have a motion for the amended language?
So,
So moved by Mrs. Davis and
Second.
a second by Mr. Felber. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis,
yes.
Mr. Felber,
Yes.
Ms. Curtis.
Yes. That passes 3-0. Now, on to miscellaneous.
No, don't, that was for the amendment. Are we clear? We
Yeah.
completely voted?
Yeah.
Okay, just wanna make sure we didn't miss a step. I thought we were just voting on the amendment okay. Good to go, 3-0.
Anything for miscellaneous?
I have one thing in miscellaneous, just, first of all, the administrative and the teachers and everybody are doing a tremendous job. No one's been through this before, and nobody wants to be here. And, this board has met in work sessions. This is our first time in an in-person meeting, and while I think many of us would prefer to be in our living room, I personally, my opinion is that I cannot ask teachers and administrators to report to work and follow guidelines if this board doesn't meet and do the same guidelines. So, that's why I'm here tonight, and I think it's, I can't ask them to show up if we aren't. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and the board still needs to meet, and there's a lot of responsibilities that need to be continually assessed. So, I think that we just need to keep the communication open the way we have. But I think we've done a good job social distancing tonight. If there's a bigger crowd, well, we'd have to address that, by the city's guidelines.
No, I would echo that. Mrs. Powers' remarks in her superintendent's report. It is good to be back in person, even under these circumstances. And I look at all the activity, and I refer back to my remarks in my president's report of everything that our staff is doing. And our teachers are continuing to clean out classrooms, in some cases 20, 30 years collected, and being completely upended and moving to unfamiliar locations. We have little ones who are going to be reporting to spaces that they are unfamiliar with. A lot of change for everybody, and our families have made the courageous decision to send their children back to the buildings under our trust. And I think as an administration and as a district, I think we've gone above and beyond to make sure that we're following all guidelines, following the gold standard. We're not being driven by politics. We're being driven by science and the recommendations of our healthcare officials. And I want to make sure that we as a board, do the things that we're asking our staff and our students to do. So it feels good to be back in a public space, in person. Even under these circumstances, it is a little weird, but I'll take it. But I do appreciate the commitment of all of our staff, and just hours on end of doing the best that they can to prepare for an opening, knowing full well that there's a high probability that there's going to be some other change. And we gotta be able to change on a dime. It's difficult, it's hard for everyone involved. So, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into bringing us this far.
And I'm just going to add, with all the responses we got from our families and parents as to, having to make a very, very difficult decision where they want their kids to be in the fall, the majority of our parents do want them in the buildings. But that's not to say that whatever choice you made for your family is the wrong choice or the right choice.
Right.
It's just the best choice that I'm sure you've had, as families, had numerous discussions, which is why it's taken so long to get some of our responses back, because families were just waiting to see what was best for their students, what was advised by maybe their doctors, what the state has led us to. And I just want to say that I know our communities always pull together and support each other. So I hope this is something that we continue to do, despite your choice of whether you want your child to be online at home, or whether you want your child to be among peers and to be in the schools. Like I said, there's no wrong or right choice. It's just whatever the best choice for your family, and I want to see our community to support each other in those choices and just back each other up, regardless of what your personal thoughts might be.
Thank you. We'll move on to item L.
Mr. Curtis,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask the board
Absolutely.
something.
I
So,
apologize for that.
there's been a lot of conversation in my network about aligning how school districts will operate based upon the governor's color system related to COVID-19. And since Mrs. Gordon and Mrs. DeFabio are not here tonight, I'm not asking the board to resolve anything. But what I would like to recommend to the board for consideration and a hopeful conversation on August 19th would be if the county were to advance to the purple level. And I asked Mr. Sullen to send me what purple level meant, so let me just read it into record here. So if we get to the purple level, it's considered to be level 4, and that would be considered a public emergency. And in a public emergency, there's severe exposure and spread of COVID-19, and the order from the governor would be that we would only leave our home for supplies and services, and that we would follow all current orders. So my recommendation to the board for consideration for the 19th board meeting is, as a school district, if the county were to have the misfortune of getting to that level, which is very scary, in the purple level, and they're suggesting that we should not be out of our homes again, I would like to have the parents have that forethought that if it's purple, the district on the next school day would transition or pivot to remote teaching and learning for our on-campus option. Obviously, the virtual kids will remain, they're going to be out there, but we have to have a plan. And then second to that is if we do pivot to the remote platform under the level of purple, level 4, I would suggest that the district would need to stay there for at least 2 weeks, because to ask a parent this week to do this and prepare for childcare or whatever, and then next week we're doing something else, is a disadvantage for our families. But if and we had the great fortune in Summit County for being in the red level for a few days, and then we were out of it, and now we're in the orange level. And we're hopeful that that's where we can stay. But we have to understand that the decisions that we make as a school district when we're going to ask our families to pivot out are significant, and they have to have enough time to make those adjustments within their own family unit. So the two asks then are consideration that if the county were to advance to purple, which is level 4, on the next school day, the district would pivot to remote teaching and learning for our on-campus option. And then if we do get there, the commitment to our families would be that we would remain there in purple for at least 2 weeks, even if we, as a county, had the fortune of going back to red or orange, because we have to give parents that time to make some adjustments. So I wanted to plant that seed for you this evening for some consideration, and hopefully on the next board agenda we can have further conversation with Mrs. Gordon and Mrs. DeFabio back, because it is a significant decision to make, but I think an important one, and our plan currently does not address that. And it would be nice to revise the plan so our families would know when they would expect to have to pivot out and what those circumstances might appear.
I think that's reasonable, but I would also add that at any pivot, because it might not be the county, it might be the state, that, we can set whatever discussion in the future, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so there is some stability, because that, I think, is the problem with the variable codes and the colors and the changing, that if we say we're following the code, people are going to be under the assumption that we're pivoting. We could be every other day, and that would be very disruptive. So I think we need to broaden the language on whatever authority is directing us to not be able to meet in person, that we have a set time, because it's not only the parents, it's the teachers and their own kids and their own districts, and what they're facing. So maybe we can discuss 2 weeks, 3 weeks, reset period, whatever you want to call it.
No, I think that's reasonable, and I think it's enough of a framework at least to have a conversation where we can have some consensus and land on something where, from an informational standpoint, parents can at least know and understand what to expect, if the circumstances change like that. So I think that's reasonable.
And it is similar to what other districts are doing, so.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Anything else for Miscellaneous? I should have said that before. Okay, so we'll move on to to item L, which is executive session. And we do have a need for executive session. So the Board of Education will enter into executive session at 8:55 to discuss employment and compensation of public employees as per Board of Education Policy 0166A, and to discuss specialized details of security arrangements as per Board of Education Policy 0166G. I will make the motion to go into executive session. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Davis. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Felber?
Yes.
Okay. We are now in executive session. I do not anticipate that we will have further business once we reconvene.